Today on World Business, as ransomware attacks surge worldwide, new guidance is calling for a fundamental rethink in how organizations prepare for digital threats. Now, the emphasis is shifting from response to readiness, urging companies to plan for the worst before it happens. Well, the advice is simple, but it's often overlooked. Maintain offline backups, test them regularly, and ensure manual procedures can step in when systems go down. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Well, the latest figures show the average cost of a ransomware breach has doubled in just 2 years. For many firms, that's not just an IT failure, but a business stopping event. Yet experts say the difference between paralysis and recovery often comes down to preparation and leadership. Well, tonight we'll explore how proactive offline planning can limit damage during attacks, why organizational vigilance and resilience matter now more than ever, and what practical steps every business can take to strengthen its defenses. Well, joining me now to unpack the lessons from this new guidance and the mindset shift it demands is cybersecurity expert Dr. Junaid Ali, Fellow of the Institution of Engineering and Technology. Dr. Ali, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, sounds simple, doesn't it, this guidance, although we know that it's not happening across the board. How significant is this new guidance, do you think, in shifting organizations' preparations for possible ransomware threats?
Yeah, so this new advice from the National Cybersecurity Centre, it kind of comes after they've seen a 50% increase in highly significant cyber attacks for the third year running. And it also comes following research produced by the Institution of Engineering and Technology showing that a majority of adults are now fearful of being hacked. So I think this really reflects a trend we're seeing, which is an industrialization of cyber attacks. And the root cause of this is attackers are both able to benefit from cyber attacks being profitable, so they're able to extort money from people from ransoms, whilst also being able to achieve disruption to our critical national infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does feel for the non-technical people like me that there's an awful lot out there that we ought to be worried about. One of the pieces of advice is that proactive offline planning should take place. What does that actually mean in practice, and why is it so critical?
Absolutely. So to kind of understand the attacks we're trying to mitigate with this kind of guidance, essentially what we're seeing happening at the moment is ransomware attacks, as they will encrypt people's personal information and business information. The problem with that is that they will also often go after things like online backups. And the problem with that is that that can really affect business continuity. It can mean that essential business data is taken away. And so a part of the motivation of this is making sure that there are offline backups of data, which ransomware actors cannot get to, but also kind of bread and butter cyber security hygiene to make sure these attackers can't get through in the first place. So things like keeping software up to date. When it comes to passwords, ideally using something like a password manager. The rule of thumb is longer is better. So having unique randomly generated passwords for each website, enabling two-factor authentication where possible, and then also being mindful of scam emails, or what we call phishing emails, which will often attempt to, they'll send emails at such a vast volumes that often the timing will feel right for someone who gets that email. So being wary of those, even if the timing is right. So kind of mixing these offline resilience approaches with kind of day-to-day cybersecurity hygiene is really essential.
It's very interesting what you say about the role that the offline world has to play still in all of this. We've seen huge valuations of companies that offer services in the cloud, the so-called cloud. We've become, I think, as business people, members of the public now, quite used to just putting things in the cloud. But it seems to be the case that actually putting everything in the cloud isn't always the answer.
Yes, and there are tactics that cybersecurity professionals can use to kind of mean that data cannot be, backups cannot be tampered with, that they are resilient to an extent. But of course, still a lot of this type of technology, it isn't adopted by a lot of organizations. And of course, there are incidents where these types of security measures may not be as resilient as people expect. So in these cases, offline backups are important. Resilience planning, if your communication systems go offline, how do you talk to the people in your organization to make sure there's an incident response process? So it really comes to having these kind of resilient systems and having these kind of backups and continuity planning.
And Dr. Ali, I'm right in thinking that you don't need to be a huge corporate, a big conglomerate to take sensible steps. Of course, we know statistics tell us that 90% of all businesses are small and medium-sized enterprises. Are there things that businesses of all size, with all levels of budget, can do to stress test and to make sure that they've got those offline backups in place?
Absolutely, and I think the guidance from the National Cybersecurity Centre has kind of really underscored a lot of these basic day-to-day practices. There's a scheme called Cyber Essentials, and that kind of helps to ensure small to medium-sized businesses, they can stay abreast of kind of the bulk of these types of vulnerabilities that these attackers will target.
And of course, in the work you do, I'm sure you meet many business leaders as well as academics, technology people. Do you get a sense that leadership teams for businesses are finally starting to treat cybersecurity as a proper board-level business continuity risk and issue, rather than just something for the technical team to worry about?
Definitely. I mean, historically, it would be the situation that people would often only worry about cybersecurity after something had happened. But there's definitely a lot more awareness around this at the moment. And of course, we're seeing greater regulation around things like critical national infrastructure. And I think there's a package of regulation that's being planned for cybersecurity as well, certainly in the UK. So I think as these develops, it will become increasingly not just a governance and risk type matter, but something that will be kind of integrated in kind of the day-to-day running of businesses.
And what are some of the most common mistakes that companies make when it comes to ransomware preparation and response?
Yeah, so kind of the data we're seeing at the moment is that attackers are increasingly going after socio-technical factors. So they will mean things like people who will get compromised either through a phishing email or, if they've reused their password somewhere and they've been in a data breach. So those kind of, that is kind of a significant area of risk at the moment, which really relies on user education and things like that to be able to address. And then at the flip side of this, we also see some attacks to do with outdated legacy systems, which are also a risk that as a profession we need to stay abreast of.
And you mentioned the social side there as well as the technology itself. Do you think organizational culture is also a big element here?
Absolutely, and I think one of the things in the past I've kind of researched has been this psychological factor of kind of loss aversion, where people will often feel the pain of a loss twice as much as the pleasure of a gain, and that can often lead people to cycling down in terms of when they face a cyber attack. But I think it's often important for us to kind of catch ourselves and kind of be aware of what's going on and address these risks as early as possible to stop us kind of getting caught in those cycles.
Now, of course, there are many thousands of businesses and many different types of people in different countries who'll be watching this. And of course, you can't give blanket advice to everybody. But if you had to sort of distill your knowledge down to just a few of the most important tips that you could give to business owners, to leaders, to just improve their defences just that little bit more, what would those key tips be?
Yep. So I guess the top 5 things would be keep backups, offline backups, keep your devices up to date with the latest software, try and use randomly generated long unique passwords for each website. A password manager can help you do this, enabling two-factor authentication where possible, and then being wary of scam emails is also essential.
And then finally, Dr. Ali, if the awful thing does happen and a company is subject to an attack, what's the best way of responding in the aftermath?
Yeah, so the risk factor with something like ransomware is what we'll often see is that even if people will pay the ransom, they won't necessarily get their data back. So I think it kind of requires a interdisciplinary approach where it is consulting with kind of law enforcement, the regulatory side of things, but also liaising with cybersecurity professionals to try and recover data where possible and try and mitigate the impact of this, and then bring the systems online safely and securely. We tend to call these phases the incident response and the digital forensics phase. So we'll often start with an instant response process to get systems back online safely and securely. And then what will follow is kind of a forensic response to try and find out what has happened and attempt to kind of bring the people through like the criminal justice system.
Dr. Junaid Ali, we thank you very much indeed for that important information and for your analysis. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, the IMF is meeting from October the 13th to the 18th and is releasing its October World Economic Outlook. Now, these meetings bring together finance ministers, central bankers and other global leaders to discuss the state of the global economy. Nick Harper brings this report.
The International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook report reads like a good news, bad news briefing document. First, the good news. The global economy is ticking along, the IMF says. Growth is expected during the course of this year, and the IMF has even revised up its global growth forecast for 2025 by 0.2%. That's since its last estimate back in July. It's now sitting, it says, at 3.2% growth overall around the world this year. Indeed, the IMF's chief economist said the impact of tariffs is not as bad as was feared. But he also added it is worse than we anticipated a year ago, and this is where the bad news comes in. The IMF says the effects of tariffs and the US-China trade war are already being felt, and those effects are likely to get worse. The longer they continue, the more, the IMF says, we'll see prolonged uncertainty, more protectionism and labour supply shocks. And ultimately, the IMF says, any further tariff war escalation will pose a significant risk to global growth. Also out this week, the IMF's Global Financial Stability Report. It highlights that global stock markets have been largely resilient in recent months, but market optimism so far masks the possibility of potential threats, namely as expectations about AI and its impact on the economy could trigger a drop for assets. Share prices could shift lower if confidence in AI falls. The bottom line for now, uncertainty reigns. Indeed, that word, uncertainty, appeared 102 times in the new World Economic Outlook report. So if President Trump's favourite word, as he says, is tariffs, then the result is uncertainty becoming perhaps the IMF's most used word this year. Nick Harper for AnewZ in Washington, D.C.
The International Monetary Fund, IMF, opened its World Economic Outlook press briefing on the 14th of October with a message from Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas, director of the research department, that blends cautious optimism with clear warnings. While the global economy has weathered recent trade shocks better than expected, the outlook remains fragile and vulnerable to renewed disruptions.
Global trade developments continue to shape the outlook, but other drivers are increasingly coming into the picture. In April, the US shook global trade norms by announcing sweeping tariffs. Our April report offered a range of estimates for the resulting growth downgrade, from modest to significant. 6 months on, where are we? The good news is that the growth downgrade is at the modest end of the range, with growth projected at 3.2% this year and 3.1% next year, while inflation has increased modestly and is proving more persistent. The tariff shock is here, and it is further dimming already weak growth prospects. This is clear even in the US. Growth is revised down from last year, the labor market is weakening, and inflation has been revised up and is persistently above target, signs that the economy has been hit by a negative supply shock. All is not gloomy. A few important developments could quickly brighten the outlook. First and foremost, resolving policy uncertainty with clearer bilateral and multilateral trade agreements and lower tariffs can help boost output in the near term. Second, AI has the potential to increase productivity. Many of us are already using it, and we can attest to its benefits. Improved domestic policies will also go a long way to help improve resilience, reduce macroeconomic risks, and help resolve global imbalances. Restoring fiscal space where needed, improving the efficiency of public spending, ensuring independent, transparent, and tailored monetary policy, and above all, adopting government policies that invest in the future and empower private entrepreneurs to innovate and thrive.
Ransomware then has become the stress test for modern business. The strongest firms aren't those that avoid attack, but those that can recover fast. From leadership to line staff, resilience begins long before a crisis hits. Well, that is all for this edition of World Business from all of us here at AnewZ. Thanks for watching.